Everyone is born with an invisible twin brother or sister who will live your life for you, no questions asked. Everyone is born with an invisible twin who will live your life for you, and only a few ever question the arrangement. The actual difference between all humans can be counted on one hand. In fact, on one finger. When one man heard it said, and even realized that it was likely so, that if you know where you are once a day, you're doing better than 99% of the people on the planet, he thought, but a lot of good it does me. Even some ordinary minds have opined that men construct mythologies around areas which either frighten them or about which they are ignorant, but without noting that this takes in all of life. For you people above with higher education, that was ignorant. A man on automatic has much to say about himself. All of it meaningless. Nothing in life, including that of man's, is useless or meaningless, so long as you don't try to step out of bounds. Although everyone rides the collective train, the difference between the few and the many is that the few travel through a tunnel that no one else does. A tunnel in their mind. One people once had a legend that said the only difference between men and the gods is that the gods can remember to shake themselves out of the stupor more often than men. Talk helps fuel the train, especially about oneself. When he heard it said that the mind uses ideas as weapons, one man mused, well, most people are still at the sticks and stones stage. Every time one man would be ready to criticize, he'd find elephants again in his shooting barrel. A cry went out, "Storm coming! Everyone go inside!" But the call was unnecessary. Once you see consciousness clearly for yourself, some people then find fault with the idea of everyone riding a train, and prefer the picture of everyone being dragged along by an uncontrollable train. Above all things, life is predictable, which is why this remains a secret. That's what it says. The speaker so spoke. Out of bleak desperation do men take religion and politics seriously. Opium dens without the drugs. And someone in the crowd asked what happened to the subject of the weather. Can't wait. Legend says that there was once a man who thought, I am either getting so wise that I am rising above such matters as being critical, either that or people are becoming so stupid that criticism is a waste of my time. Legend goes on to say that he hoped one of them was true over the other. The wolf with the most testosterone becomes leader of the pack, while the one with the second most becomes its priest. The plant foreman gave the new employee his needed instructions. That machine will turn out tires nonstop as long as it is making noise. So long as your awareness is being dragged by the train, you have none individually. One man's latest offering. Coffee stains a cup the same way thoughts do the mind, except coffee has no calories. Once you realize that all of life runs on automatic, there's really nothing left to think about, which doesn't necessarily stop you from thinking about it, however. Once the crowd became audience-like, the speaker presented his remarks. Some people know less than other people. but no one knows less than humanity as a whole. He paused with a chin scratch, then added, I may not have that exactly right, but you know what I mean. Yeah. Another example of how the collective intelligence of man is arranged and grows. At one carnival, if the man can guess your weight correctly, then you get to guess his age. There was once a mystical order who referred to that struggled for state not as being enlightened or awakened, but rather as having gotten off the train. Having mental illness is many people's attempt to deal with not having a personal mental, healthy or otherwise. One way that life keeps men from knowing what's going on is by letting most of them believe that they do. Every brief second you spend taking the normal affairs of life seriously is another short nail in your coffin of potential consciousness. If the universe wanted men to take existence seriously, don't you think it would have most certainly included the enlightened? Doesn't that hint to you something? Every time the pride's conversation would turn to speculations regarding the subject of charisma, one lion would think to himself, what's there to theorize about having the biggest balls? He privately worried that soon mythology would become rampant. I just read them. No, I don't. A viewer says that in honor of what he learned from our last show, that he has named the left side of his brain, keep a head on your shoulders, and the right side, watch your step. Yeah. And says that thus far doing so has proven of distinct value. But then further notes that most of the tricks he's used before worked for a while. What's wrong, he asked. A question I'll turn over to you. The difference between the physical food chain and the intellectual one is that in the latter instance, none in the chain benefit. According to one ancient legend, every mystical school that has ever existed on this planet had, in addition to its public name, another, which always is, let me out of here. One man says that he has himself this personal view that nobody gets criticized what don't deserve to be criticized. And he says, upon your feeling the slightest need or provocation to use it, feel perfectly free to do so. One man had to periodically ask himself, what kind of progress is it to increasingly not care? He had no answer to this, at least not when he cared to share. Another example of how human attention operates. The only people who ever really believe that you ever reap what you sow are those who have been sowed on, never those who did the sowing. There is a legend which tells of a man who would throw livers and intestines into the air and they'd fall back as theories and beliefs. When thoroughly inside themselves, the few find that they can't see what's going on. In return for the lion having removed a pebble from his shoe, a genie once offered to grant the beast a wish, and suggested perhaps that it'd like to have the ability to speak. And the lion asked what advantages that would bring, and the genie replied that then he'd be able to talk about himself. The lion pondered this for a minute or so and declined. Civilizations and the human mind expand by continually destroying, then rebuilding themselves. To be conscious, you have no bricks or mortar to work with. There is a unique feature to how ordinary men think, which is that the thoughts cannot be thought about impartially and survive. Men feel sorry for animals since they can't feel sorry for themselves. An ancient manuscript tells of a people who believed that the only difference between men and the gods was in the matter of, and here the writing is a bit faint and unclear, but says either in the matter of self-reflection or self-pity. Guess the choice is yours. Note, if your consciousness has anything at all in common with your mind, you're not conscious. One guy, apparently in an attempt to identify himself as a mystic, hung a sign around his neck which read, "Do not buy anything from this man." Only shadows and ghosts talk about themselves. Asked to repeat it, he agreed and said, "Even though I cannot tell you what the secret is, I can tell you what it is about. The secret is knowing the truth about life." Which, truth be told, is damn close to what it is. As regards metaphors, metaphors told by those who know aren't actually metaphors. Then what are they, is the next questaroo. Now I lay me down to sleep, as I remember, talk is cheap. Yes, but how cheap is the metaphorical query which has a literal answer. It is only after creatures have an intellect that they can conceive of 2 + 2 = 4, and have the singular experience of it most often not. Once you understand that nothing works, you can then let go, relax, wallow in, and thoroughly enjoy how marvelously everything works. Yeah. And a viewer writes to complain about the order in which the last 2 news items were read. Says he, "I would like to strongly object to," forget it. A man asked himself, why is it that it is always the idiots who are the first to complain when a movie is over, a meal is finished, or a sentence concluded? Proverb update. Not patriotism, but sequence is the final refuge of intellectual scoundrels. There was once a race whose myths held that the sole distinction between men and the gods is that men believe that they can determine the order in which things occur, while the gods recognize that there is no such order. The many are given to complaining that everything is happening at once, which in their case is an illusion. An illusion, curiously enough, that the few spend a lifetime attempting to make into reality. The creative, to the ordinary mind, must be spelt F-A-M-I-L-I-A-R. Tonight's bonus question. Bonus question. How can you tell that an ordinary man doesn't know anything? That's right, he's talking. What do you mean, what do you win? The many know that the few are among them, for they do periodically sense them breathing. On the back of every greeting card printed by that firm known as The Secret About Life Company, you will find their slogan, "When you care enough not to say anything." There is an epitaph update that didn't make the news that perhaps would be apropos here. What a web of delusions we weave, when at first we believe we can think. Going to pull another string, or at least one, and you can see that they expand in numerous directions. Example from ordinary life, and I'm about to I think, pull it out from the news media while reminding those who may be tuning this in at an early age that this has nothing to do with the news media. It has nothing to do with anything in life in particular, and everything in the world to do with everything. So this is in no way a comment on the news or the media, but nowadays the news has sort of become the worldwide, or the media and the news, sort of the worldwide Athenian agora, the public marketplace that we can just pick it out, and people who see this in various parts of the planet, it's sort of a common meeting ground. It is very common nowadays on the news, as it's become more and more of a entertainment field, to have to fill it up. There's more and more time and space and the electronic and the print media to fill up, and so we have more and more of the news organizations doing man on the street responses to what's occurring in the news. Now I'm just going to pull out one example, and I assume, I will trust that you can see the other aspects and the ramifications of it off in a myriad of directions. It will be some comment about the, let's say, a pending or a potential militaristic hotspot on someone's border, some country's border. And the Prime Minister, the President, some spokesman for the government will be warning that this country, country A, may have to go take over and stick their nose forcibly into the affairs of adjoining country B for country A's own protection. All this is irrelevant to what we're talking about. But let us say that that is said. And they go on for a few minutes, and then they have a reporter out in the street, and they stop people. And they stop what seems to be obviously a teenage lad, let's say. And they ask him, do you have any fear that now the government is really beginning to seriously rattle the militaristic swords regarding the troubles over in country B? Does that frighten you, being a man of possible military age? And they stick the mic in his face. And he says, yeah, it does. He said, because when I dropped out of school 2 years ago, it was on the basis I was going to join the Army, because I thought it'd be a good career, and I'm just waiting to get to be old enough to get in. But now, to tell you the truth, when I see us threatening to go in and become militaristically involved in another country's what is obviously just an internal civil dispute, it does frighten me, and it makes me have some grave questions as to our foreign policy. Now, perhaps I didn't do enough dramatics and try to purposefully mispronounce words and etc. The point being, we have here a lad, let us say, he's less than 18. Let's say that's the militaristic age, or the age of the draft. So we have somebody somewhere less than 18. He's been dropped out of school for 2 years by his own admission, so that means he has a 9th or 10th grade education by Western standards. And he is, now take that into account in the last minute of the conversation that I put together for him, of him discussing the certain reservations he has about our country's, whatever country it is, foreign policy, if we're going to get involved in what is patently obvious to him, an thoroughly internal matter will country be, and it frightens him. It now makes him have second thoughts as to whether he is going to actually go and volunteer for service. From some ordinary view, I thought that'd be obvious enough you'd make your other examples. I guess we'll see if we hadn't already said. From a quite sane, ordinary view, you could look at that. Again, assume you're watching this on TV, and that's the public marketplace, and you can do it somewhat removed, and apparently sit there with the time to mentally consider what's going on and try to analyze it. Speaking ordinarily so far. An ordinary mind would be well within its rights to scoff at that. First off, to scoff at the whole thing of them wasting valuable, if it's an ordinary person, They probably consider the news, the events of the world they're supposed to, is to being serious and important matters. Why are they wasting our good time interviewing people? But now, to the more specific, an ordinary mind would be predictably well served and expected, or it would be acceptable for it to have grave criticism, almost scoff, if not ridicule, this pimple-faced 16-year-old kid with a 9th grade education. Because here in Sweden, as you all know, we know what the general intelligence, and I'm not talking about understanding, just the general walking around knowledge of people who graduate from high school. So, forget somebody that dropped out in the 9th grade. But here he is, and the tail end of what he said almost could have come out of the mouth of a political pundit, some well-educated, social, political observer. The point is, an ordinary mind under those conditions would be not acting in a manner untoward whatsoever to itself, to go, what kind of crap is that? That kid has probably never been outside downtown Oslo. He doesn't know crap about foreign. Where does he go saying stuff like this? And where do they get off? The newsman staying there, the guy that's supposed to be a respected and intellectual observer, and him staying there and nodding, and maybe even asking a couple of follow-up questions like, so I guess you may reconsider your decision to make the army your career, which the kid just said, but the kid goes, yes, I do, I must say. The man could sit and not improperly just ridicule that this is ridiculous. That kid knows nothing about foreign policy. He knows nothing. Where does he come up with terms about, obviously, a matter of internal civil strife in that country? Now, I'm assuming now when I'm speaking to this ordinary mind that he believes he knows of which he speaks, that these terms do have that the currency of his words does have something backing it up, that he believes that he could explain it. But he looks upon, not sans any foundation, he looks upon what this kid said, this illiterate or semi-illiterate kid, speaking about why he may now think again about making the service his career if the guys running our country, making our foreign policy, are going to be involved in such international faux pas as to stick our military foot in a foreign incursion in matters which are obviously simply internal civil matters of unrest there. No, not so quick will I join now. And a mind listening to this thinks, what kind of crap is this? Have we all gone insane? That boy doesn't know anything about it, which is hardly worth getting upset about. I mean, you just assume that most ordinary minds, and I'm saying ordinary minds now in the middle of the bell curve of education and sophistication of any given time and place, would almost out of hand dismiss, before they even heard it, they wouldn't have to hear it, any ideas coming from someone with a 9th grade education. Someone just out of someone below their economic, educational, social sphere or realm. So to begin with, they would just, but then push it a little bit further. It is now part and parcel. Remember, this is not an attack on the news media, because the news media is just part of life. It's as much a part of life as the guy I'm talking about. It's chairs, airplanes, weather balloons, swimming pools. But here it is that now part of man's ordinary intellectual life is being taken up by the news media, presenting these stories and then speaking to people who obviously, now remember, I'm back to the ordinary view of an ordinary mind. They present a story that has immediately dire possible implications to us all. That is, a possible militaristic action in a foreign country. But why do they then waste our time asking ordinary people? And not just ordinary people, not me. They're asking people with no education, people who have no idea what they're talking about. What is going on here in life? Is the whole world become crazy? Is everybody become so dumb that they don't know what they're doing? Such a mind And I'm using that as a collective view, as I said, of the reasonably, ordinarily, averagely hip, sophisticated, and educated of any given time and place, would look upon this as being somewhere verging on insanity. That the kid does not know what he's talking about, and also that most people do not know what they're talking about, especially when it comes to very complex matters, such as foreign policy, the higher levels of political intrigue. How is it that the kid can say that? How could he say the things he said? Even now, let us assume that he has no idea what he's talking about. He could not have been questioned if the reporter had asked him anything much other than, "Where'd you buy those shoes?" After his comment, the kid would have been stuck. He could not have gone into any exposition regarding his comments. And yet he opened his mouth and went, by now, other than children who might be turning this on, I would assume that most people who have listened to this and have any insight into life understand that you do not have to know what you're talking about to talk. Given the fact that no one knows what they're going to say next, at least no one ever challenges that, they just walk off and think, well, screw you. Since no one knows what they're going to say next, how are you going to say that anyone knows what they're talking about? And yet, things press on, things roll on. The ordinary mind, from whose view I have just got through expressing sentiments, would say that that kid has no knowledge, no understanding of what is involved in foreign policy. To him, he just sees, well, they're over there fighting and they may spill over our borders and hurt some of our villages close to the line of demarcation over there, so maybe we should go over there and try to calm things down. And this ordinary mind can say, well, he has no idea of foreign policy. That should be left to the experts. The assumption being, it's not even the question, but the assumption being with sane ordinary people, that when you get into the areas of real leadership, when we get into the House of Parliament, when we get into 72 Sycamore Street, for those of you who are not Finns, that's where our Prime Minister lives here. When you get into the level of the White House and the Congress, there the people know what's going on. I mean, they are privy to information about country B, where all this problem is. They simply know things we don't. And so they're in a position to make such decisions. Have you lost all? There's nothing left? Anybody still believes that? Well, of course, ordinary minds have to believe that. And they can dismiss that and turn it off. But if you hadn't turned it off, there's a good occasion. Well, certainly somebody knows what's going on. Okay. Are they gone? Are they gone? But back to the more specific area toward which I was intending to find a bird. And for those of you slow of foot, preferably on the ground, not the wing. Well, it's easier to catch a goose when he's running. As many of you who have attempted to expand your awareness know quite well. Well, that and the fact that a goose sure can run like a mother when you're after it. Yeah, but I'm almost conscious. I can almost understand it. Quack, quack. Just over the horizon. Did I, without having to resort to any lower comedic, perhaps I'm being charitable, comedic, dramatic talents, self-serving comment, if I ever heard one? Well, no, it's not. I don't make a living as a comedian, so. Or as a dramatist. Back to, let's just clear this up, that the kid, what I used to represent, that constantly you've always had in life, long before you had the news media, and I was just, as I said, using that for what I hoped would be a more commonly available example to which most people could turn their attention and understand what I meant from various sectors and cultures and areas of people who might hear this. But back to my kid in the example. Let's just put it point blank. The boy has never been outside Helsinki. He hardly knows his ass from the top of a yellow cab. Of course, that could have to do with a certain medical problem he experiences, which I don't want to go into. I'm not a doctor either, so don't write me and ask me what that problem might be because you think you have it. If you think you do, if you cannot tell the difference between your ass and the top of a yellow cab, then I will assure you this: you have the problem. But back to the kid. Let's just state outright: the kid he has no idea what he's talking about. That if you talk to him personally, he is just barely conversationally literate. And yet he said all those things. I mean, he is just walking around, he's below average in just ordinary intelligence. And yet he stood there and said that. The kind of words, I have to go back and repeat it, I did it with some little purpose at the time. The words were pretty coherent, used the kind of catchphrases that those in political power, especially those who comment on it, reporters, just those of at least average ordinary education and intelligence use. He used those kind of terms, seemed to be thoughtful, and pointing out that he was going to make the service his career until he started seeing our government began to apparently consider basing foreign policy on their response to what is obviously simply internal civil disputes in country B, and of such frivolous endeavors and adventures, I shall not be a part thereof. And you talk to the kid later, the center of his world, it was the Smashing Pumpkins or sniffing glue. And yet he said that. And so, all right, here's what you're faced with, or what I want you to look at, is how can this be? How can he say such as that when, as I said, to skip all the cheap theatrics, let's just simply state, the kid just barely knows enough to tie his shoes and get around without getting killed every day and to find his way back home, and yet he can say such as that. The reason is quite simple. So complex that people refuse, well, it is quite simple. He is part of the collective mind. And if that attitude was part of the collective mind of us here in Belgium right now, let's just say that that was part of our collective intelligence. And there's no way we'll spend forever if I start trying to confine and to lime it out into specific borders. It is just, you have to begin to see it yourself. There is, given certain subjects, there is the collective mind about certain things at any given time, at any given place. You can simply pop into France today, perhaps in Bordeaux, and there's a big deal going on about whether we should change the labeling in wine due to the latest health findings. And you would find in Bordeaux, maybe, not necessarily, I'm just having to make all this up because it is also shifting and it is a continual ad hoc adventure going on. But let us say, I'm just going to have to give you one, stabilize it long enough for me to get the sentence out of my mouth, that there in Bordeaux right now, that concern, forget yay or nay, forget what the prevailing opinion is, but the concern, this question is now part of their collective mind. It is part of their collective mental concern. Forget why, forget whether, how much self-interest involved, forget all that. It simply is. You get there and you find out. It'd be easy to find out. You sit in a corner cafe, you walk up and down the street, you talk to a handful of people, and almost everyone, quote, as they like to say, almost the subject of the the proposed change in wine labeling is on everyone's lips. It is the topic of conversation. That is part of that place. Bordeaux, France, let's say it was last week, that is part of their collective thinking. Not yes or no, it's just part of the collective energy in their minds. Using them, of course we know not everyone in town by any means. And that's not the only thing. When I say it's the center of conversation. You might turn right around to a group of people while you're staying there, and that everybody, you walked in, you said, I hear you people are having some problems with them attempting to change the wine labeling. And suddenly, let's say it's a group of 50 guys sitting around a cafe, and they'll go, yeah! And they run, they rant and rail against it for 20 minutes. Then you can say, by the way, I also heard, didn't you have a mayor here that for the first time in France in the last 20 years said that he was in favor of abortion, and they'll go, oh my God. Well, assuming they're all good Catholics and anti-abortion, let's just say. And then they'll get just as upset for another 20 minutes, and wine's not mentioned. You understand what? So when I say it's the center of conversation, it can be made so. You can bring up a subject, and that subject can be the center. It can be of extreme importance right then until the subject changes. And it could also be part of their collective thinking. That is the problem of proposed changes in wine labeling. I said there it was in Bordeaux, France. It was part of their collective thinking. It was a reality. People's minds, those of you who know who have given it any notice whatsoever, your mind hardly ever stops. So it's going to be thinking about something. And this is one of the somethings it's thinking about last week. You could pop in there this week, walk in up to that same outdoor cafe that holds 50 people, and there's 50 people, some who were there last week and some not, whatever, and bring up the subject, and nobody has any great interest. That's what I meant by it's ever shifting. But at any given time, there are things that are part of their thinking. Here is what no one ever notices. Not that they're supposed to, but psychology, the closest. Every now and then somebody will write me when I'll be talking, they'll say, do you ever read anything about subatomic physics, what's going on? And they'll dig up some little sentence that they just read, and I can see their little hand just quiver when they write, like, my God! And then it's all these big question marks, like, huh? Would you write me back? Would you say something? Because in a sense, they don't mean to. But in one sense, there are areas of physics that are even getting closer to this, but they will never put it together. They're not supposed to. But back to the fact of those apparently who are charged with such matters, psychology being the primary one, and religion secondarily so years ago. But they will never see that kid, let's use my kid now, back to the idea of Bordeaux or the war, the kid who is just barely literate can stand there and go rah, 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 and say things not only does he have no knowledge of, and he's not just being pretentious. We're not talking about just a boulevardier, an intellectual form of one at a cocktail party. The old thing, the conversation comes up to the war, and he had a couple of drinks and goes, rah, 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 make some comment about the problems going on, and several people are impressed the way it sounds, and then somebody says, wait a minute. Those 4 or 5 sentences he just said, he lifted. I just got through reading. That's the editorial in this week's Time magazine. We're not just talking about that. We're talking about the kid is not mouthing anything. He has not read anything about it. And if you ask him, well, what you just said, it doesn't fit looking at your demeanor and the way you're dressed and your educational background. I guess you've been keeping up with the news a lot. I mean, you've absorbed those ideas for you to be able to stand there and do that. And it turns out he never turns on the news. So I'm trying to get you to see this is not a, quote, pretentious act. He can simply stand there and open his mouth and go, rah, 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 and you're listening and think, it's not just a pretentious act, but this is damn near insanity. Because he has no idea what he's talking about. None. And yet I could have turned my head, or I could have read those words written, and someone told me that our prime minister said them, or at least the head of the opposition party. A man with several degrees. If you had just printed out what that kid said the last minute of his interview, and you had told me that Dr. So-and-so, the head of our opposition party here in Italy, had said that, I would have believed it. And now you tell me it's a kid with a 9th grade education that never had a job, never been outside Venice, and you tell me he did it. It's unbelievable. No. When something becomes part of the collective mind, everyone has a piece of it. I should start off crudely and back off for you. Everyone knows it. That sounds a bit strong. I can back off. Try to whittle it down like we do here when we make Italian ices. Shave it a bit, but the first part is actually true. It's just that the individuals there within a given area knowing it does not necessarily mean that they have any knowledge that they know it. But once something becomes part of a collective think, the collective mind activity of one area, And I repeat one more time, you can't just take what I've said and try to jump back and think, well, wait a minute, now how can we apply that to everybody in Bordeaux? Not everybody in Bordeaux. That is why I said it cannot truly be depicted. It cannot be depicted in the sense of drawing out an area and say, all right, this is where such and such happens. It's everywhere. It's universal. I'm just having to make it local, and all local examples become mere anecdotes. They are limited by their very nature. But, back to what I said, once a thing, whatever the hell it is, once a thing becomes part of the collective thinking of a time and of a place, no matter how brief it is, no matter how limited be the locale, the physical area in question, but once it is a part of a collective, that there's more than just a few people that are thinking this, thinking about it, not either one way or the other, that's not important, but this has become a serious matter. That by God, any serious person here has got to give some consideration to the possibility of them changing the labeling of wine in a manner that's going to adversely without any affect the market. And even some of you people staying here, listen to me talk, this is still in Bordeaux, even though I know all of you are not in the great business, the wine business, you know this. Our village is absolutely dependent upon the wine trade. And if it goes, we all go. You people who apparently have nothing to do with farming, vineyards, the wine making, the selling, the distribution, you know this. You may drive a taxi here, but you know this, what's most of your business? Out-of-towners here to buy wine. So this is an important matter. Okay, did I make the point? Of course, when it really gets interesting, that thank God we don't have time to go into, is when it gets into matters that are not even apparently materialistic or material, like wine, labeling. But at any rate, when I say that it becomes serious, it's on that basis that it, again, in some undefinable, even though I can say it, some unstable, it's undefinable in any permanent, stable way, but in one time and one place, which is what that represents. That represents that. Now, it's not some ways I didn't want you to think I was trying to brag or anything. But it represents... At one time and one place. It could be very momentary, it could be very, as I said, a very small locale. But if a thing, that's a thing, if a thing has become important, then everyone there knows it. That includes people who do not know it. Which is what I intended by this representation of this kid standing on a street corner, telling an interviewer, talking about how he is not going to be a part of national service, not of his own volition. No, that's the thing. Volition. Well, hey, we all get them mixed up. Of course, that offers another possibility. If you get your thing mixed up with your volition, then perhaps you should get in a yellow cab and go see that kid that had the other malady. If a thing has become an important part to some group of people somewhere for some length of time, enough that it is discernible, then this kid, what he was representing by saying things that he had no knowledge of, talking about foreign policy and internal civil unrest. If you took him aside and said, what in the hell does internal civil unrest mean? He wouldn't know. And yet he stood there and said it, and then you would be forced, if you were ordinary, you'd be forced to say, well, you have heard it on the news so much. That's almost a catchphrase that they use every time they talk about the problems as our adjoining